everyone. I'm Ghana Harb Conord, founder and editor-in-chief of today's Outlook magazine. I'll be the moderator for this session, From Aid to Development, Focus on Africa. I want to welcome you all to this session, and I want to thank you for joining us. Despite progress toward the Sustainable Development Goals, Africa continues to lag behind most of the world when it comes to socio-economic development. More than half of the global poor, those who earn under $1.90 a day, are found in Africa. 1 in 3 Africans is at the risk of food insecurity. There are a lot of challenges, obviously, but there's a lot of work that is also being done. With us today are 4 amazing individuals. Each of them is an expert in their field. They will share with us the work they're doing to address these challenges, and they will also discuss their views and the policies that work. So with us today is Ms. Elena Bonometti, Chief Executive Officer of Tostan, Mr. Richard BLEWITT, Head of Delegation and Permanent Representative to the United Nations, Ms. NOELLA COURSARIS MUSUNKA, Founder of MALAIKA Foundation, and Mr. Andrew Wilson, Global Head of Policy and External Affairs at the International Chamber of Commerce. At this point, I would like to invite each panelist to please tell us more about yourself and to share with us your opening statements. We can start with Ms. MUSUNKA.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening from wherever you are following us. Thank you so much for inviting me to be in this amazing panel. My name is Noella COURSARIS MUSUNKA. I'm the proud founder of MALAIKA, a grassroots non-profit organization that I established in 2007 with the mission of giving a voice to girls and the community in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Today, MALAIKA impacts thousands of lives free of charge each year through a school, a community center, and a clean water programs. It's actually an ecosystem that can be duplicated in any communities over the world. I'm also an ambassador for the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria, and an advisor for Concordia. But above all, I'm a mother, a feminist, and a believer that is essential human rights to access to education, to health, to opportunity.
Okay, Mr. Wilson, if you'd like to tell us a little bit about yourself and share with us your opening statements.
Sorry, I was muted, apologies, the curse of Zoom. Thank you very much for the invitation to participate today. My name is Andrew Wilson. I'm the Head of Policy and External Affairs for the International Chamber of Commerce. We're a global business organization with a presence in around 130 countries, including a deep network in the African continent. The main message I want to really convey as a headline point, almost by way of context for the discussion today is, it's fine to talk about aid and development, and yes, those are very vital and important concepts. At the same time, we really need to recognize the urgency of the situation from a real economy perspective on the ground across the African continent. And you really need to look at the IMF statistics to see that. We see increasing debt burdens, decreasing commodity prices, major capital flight across the continent. Really that, and there are many, many other indicators I could have pointed to, but taken together, what we see when we talk to businesses on the ground is real pain and real fears for the future, absent of a concept that I think should be introduced in today's discussion, which is the need for relief. And our sense is, from talking to business leaders throughout the continent and in emerging economies across the world, unless there is sufficient international support, international relief, for developing economies, in the fourth quarter of this year, we're going to see very, very significant levels of business failures, very, very significant levels of unemployment, and the result of that will be long-term economic scarring. So really my headline point is a message, a plea for action from the world's richest, largest economies, particularly the G20, to step up and deliver the relief that the African continent needs and that the real economy desperately is craving for right now.
Wonderful. Ms. Bonometti, go ahead.
everyone. Thank you, Ghana, and thank you to my colleagues, the panelists. My name is Elena Bonometti. I'm the CEO of Tostan, which is a West African-based organization. I'm calling from Dakar, Senegal, and I'm very excited to be here today to bring, the perspective that practitioners like we are at Tostan bring to this discussion. So Tostan is an organization that has partnered now for more than 30 years with communities at the grassroots to really empower them to develop and to fulfill their vision of well-being. And we don't even use the term development, actually. So I think I want to bring today to this discussion a different narrative about the topics that we are discussing today, and really a positive outlook at what can be learned from communities at the grassroots that are really given the opportunity to lead their way and to really inspire large-scale movement. So today I'm honored to represent, of course, the staff of Tostan who work across the West African region, in Senegal, in Mali, in Guinea-Bissau, in Guinea, and in the Gambia. But I'm also representing more than 8,000 communities that have declared, thanks to the empowering journey that have gone through the Tostan training program, they've declared the abandonment of human genital cutting and child marriage and other practices that are really holding them back to really fulfill their potential for well-being. And I'm also representing more than 30,000 women that have accessed leadership position, and they are today representing their communities, at the local institutions, and they have been elected. They are mayor, they are deputy mayor, and they are really, again, shaping a new way of seeing things and bringing their solution to the challenges that they have identified. So I'm excited to be part of this discussion today and look forward really to bring this grassroots perspective and, resonating to what what William just said, really maybe influencing on trying to, bring some food for thoughts to people that are listening from other continents and really want to learn from us. Thank you. Over to
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Over to Mr. BLEWITT.
Thank you so much. So for me, I think in this discussion, one of the things I've come to learn after 30 years, 7 of which was living in East Africa, is African leadership, African ownership. And, without that, the whole aid architecture is doomed. I mean, so much failure, so much weakness. That's where I'm going to be coming from. I rejoined the Red Cross 2 years ago. We have a Red Crescent. We have national societies in every country in Africa. And they are stepping up and doing what they can with their volunteers and their staff to respond to the COVID crisis. And so I strongly believe in the importance of indigenous organizations that are doing their thing and the way in which we need to change the architecture to support them to succeed. COVID, we also have to look at successes. The African CDC based out of Addis has done well. Africa has stepped up and tried to address the very complex challenge of COVID in some countries in very resource poor settings. And compared to other countries, they are doing their best. But I think, like the other speakers, I'm concerned about where is the solidarity. For sure, we are seeing as a humanitarian actor, we see the climate crisis already impacting. It's been a fairly severe year, serious floods in Sudan, serious floods in Uganda and Kenya, many parts of the Sahel with an ongoing chronic set of challenges and very inadequate responses, both to the current crisis. I mean, the COVID, the solidarities, it even financed the humanitarian efforts, let alone trying to actually help Africa from an economic perspective deal with the COVID impacts. And then lastly, I would just say, we view COVID as a marathon, not a sprint. We're going to be in this for the next 3 or 4 years. So there's no magic bullet anywhere in the world. The vaccine is not a magic bullet. And so we're going to have to adjust to a new normal and try to see where and how African policymakers can be supported in their journey to protect their people.
Wonderful. Thank you all for your introductions and your opening statements. I would like to start with our first question. Given the size of the continent, the development goals for Africa seem very daunting to fulfill, especially with so many countries each with unique challenges to overcome. How can this seemingly daunting challenge be broken down in ways that can make it feasible? And can any technologies and innovation help make this seemingly impossible goal a possibility? Andrew, perhaps we can start with you.
Oh, I can start if you're drinking.
Go for it. Yeah, of course. Please jump straight in. Go for it.
You know, I will talk about I will answer this question, but it's so hard to talk about technology because I work with a grassroots organization that I set up 13 years ago in a village where there's no water, where there's no electricity, when the school were completely closed for 5 months. Our girls doesn't have tablets. First of all, there's a problem of security, there's a problem of electricity, so they couldn't come to the school because the government didn't allow anybody to come. So we had to go to, at some point in villages, every day to distribute the homework and to take them back. So we are so far behind at some places with technology. But on the other side is we have a very high level IT room at a school. And we were able with a STEM team to create more than 1,500 mask shields 3D that we distributed at some hospital and nurses. So the future, I think for me, for Africa, is in rural places, is to really have technology centers that will be able to progress and to be ready for this kind of crisis. And this kind of crisis really show that Africa needs to be independent technologically, with food security, and with their own sustainability of economy. But to answer really to your question, technology definitely is playing a transformative role across Africa. It's furthering innovation across nearly every industry. Technology can be used to close gaps linked to gender, education, geography, income, and ages. But funding for innovation and technology remain very limited. So more needs to be done to unlock public and private sector capital, and more needs to be done to educate policymakers on the power of technology in driven African-led manufacturing. This will help solidify the connection between tech and entrepreneurship. We're talking about a continent that is so young. In the education space, which is something that lies close to my heart, given the work of my grassroots MALAIKA, technology is critical to driving development on the continent. Access to technology and adequate infrastructure is a huge factor when it comes to getting all the children, including girls, into school. That's because it's difficult to increase school and university capacity without the technology in place to accompany it, whether that's computer, internet, electricity more broadly, or the appropriate buildings in which to teach. Our school, for instance, is completely a solar panel technology where we provide green energy. Learners of all ages need to become familiar with the new technology and cope with rapidly changing workplace. But I think it's also important to think about technology and innovation when examining how education is conducted too. The rise of automation, of technological advancement is prompting a need for an updated skill set. We need to be teaching STEM subjects heavily, particularly among girls, and we must introducing technology in the classroom at a very, very young age. Education needs to be continually adapting, innovative, and ahead of the curve. And it needs to play a central place in the health. For instance, the last 5 months of all this closing, we lost 3 girls, all 12 years old, Leia, little NOELLA, and Esther Annie, and they all die with this closure. So the school, wherever we're creating, is a refuge. But if we had more technology, maybe we will be able to have saved their life. So it has a very, very key role.
Andrew, please go ahead.
I'm not drinking now. Thank you for saving me, NOELLA. Well, I'm so glad NOELLA went first because I'd like to just sort of reference a number of those points. So from our perspective, technology can be very, very important and in fact, essential driver of development. But I think just sort of take a step back, we need to really think about how do we deploy that technology within the continent, and I think this applies to emerging markets across the board. And for us, I think it talks to something Richard has said already, which is the need for local ownership and locally tailored interventions, coupled in our experience with strong international or central support. I think there's some very, very interesting findings coming out from the academic literature looking at how countries have fared in stopping the spread of the coronavirus pandemic. And really what you see there is countries that have tried to take absolute central control of the immediate response to the spread of the virus have tended not to do very well. India is a great example where central government interventions have often actually undermined very, very good efforts in the early phase of the pandemic at state level, at regional level. Then there are countries where you have local ownership, but weak or fragmented and sometimes counterproductive interventions on the central government, the United States being a great example. And again, these countries fail to stop the spread in any significant way. And then you have the success stories. And the one thing equaling out for cultural factors, geography, access to technology, medicines, whatever it might be, the one thing that unites the countries that have done relatively well is strong local ownership of the immediate response and hands-off in terms of day-to-day, but strong central government support in terms of providing resources, sharing best practices, enabling collaboration. I think that's a lesson we need to learn more broadly within a development context. This is not just something that is fit for the emergency response to COVID-19, but something that can actually help us become more effective in terms of driving development and driving the rebuild from the pandemic. And in our experience, local ownership does something that I think really speaks to the heart of this question, which it allows you to prioritize resources and interventions where you can get the greatest return on investment. We run a project called the Global Alliance for Trade Facilitation, which has many live projects within the continent currently. And the one thing we found when running that is trade facilitation or customs reforms is a space that's been dominated by a number of international institutions, historically at least over the last 20, 30 years, who've tended to drop into countries with a preconceived idea of what's needed in terms of customs and border reforms. They implement projects, often very well funded. They often don't have a huge or immediate return on investment. What we found is if you empower local businesses to identify the problems they face trading across borders and to co-create those solutions with international support and finance, with local governments, you actually find you have a project portfolio that looks very different to anything anyone has ever done before. But you often find, or in our experience, you always find that interventions actually work. So you see the return on investment immediately, and you see, in this particular experience, the immediate return for small businesses. So I think local ownership, international support, and to the point Richard made, international solidarity will be vital coming out of this crisis.
Thank you so much, Andrew. That's a lot of wonderful information. Elena, I know that Tostan has done a lot of work too, and would like to hear your input about this subject.
Thank you so much, Ghana, to bring me in. What NOELLA and Andrew resonate very much with me, and particularly NOELLA saying, the technology playing, a major role in pushing forward so many agendas. But, what we have seen at Tostan is the real innovation is empowering education, really allowing people to have the capacity, first of all, to aspire to a different situation, to a better situation for them, for their families, and for their communities. And also the capacity to, again, to lead their way, to have an agenda that has not been imposed, but an agenda that they own completely, and that they will allow them actually to influence, their local space, their local geography, and then ultimately, their national geographies. And we have seen that by really investing at the grassroots, that I said in my introduction, and giving people the information to be able to process what they see around them, what doesn't work and what works actually, and starting from really leveraging what works, and seeing what is, and somehow reinventing or revisiting their values, reinforcing their values, and trying to abandon those practices that have not, that are not aligned to those values. That is the journey that has brought all these communities, more than 8,000 communities, to abandon practice like female genital cutting. But I would also mention the same communities have taken this journey to the next level. Actually, what we have seen that empowering education is strengthening the democracy processes in Africa, and is strengthening also the civic engagement. So an empowered community members is then an empowered citizen. And the empowered citizens is able, first of all, to advocate for allocation of resources where there is need and what they think the need is, but also to ask for accountability, to ask for transparency. So again, I think the real innovation here to allow people to be engaged citizen, to ask and to be able to allocate resources where is needed, so that the government can really push forward important agendas that, of course, Andrew and NOELLA referred to. And so we've seen this bottom-up approach and this within the system approach that is really bringing about really sustainability in the outcomes, but also really a profound ownership. And I think Richard was mentioning this into his introduction. I think ownership is the key actual innovation in all of this. Top-down approaches are not the solution anymore. So I think we need to be bold and recognize that, you know, we need to be. The innovation is not only access to infrastructure of the technology, the innovation is in the mindset that needs to, and there is a shift that needs to be happen if we want to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So, thank you.
Thank you, Elena. Our next question is, opportunities to further Africa's development are challenged by the fact that governments are often too institutionally weak themselves. For instance, some countries are still battling the after effects of civil wars. In such cases, how can NGOs step in to fill in gaps and ensure development does not fall down the agenda? Richard, maybe we can start with you.
Okay, so I'm going to give an example. There's a very wonderful president of MSF who was here in New York last year speaking, and she just come from Central African Republic. And she asked herself a question, which is, why has MSF been in Central Africa for 20 years and they haven't built the capacity of the public health system? That's a big question. So does MSF deliver health outcomes to people in very resource-poor settings around the world? Yes. Is it an important actor in doing that humanitarian work? Yes. Is it acceptable that you can go to somewhere for 20 years and you haven't actually been involved in training public health professionals in Central African Republic or reinforcing the public health system? No, it's not acceptable. So, you know, the question of what models do you go with to, and your thinking, you know, this morning we had the Central African Republic Minister for Health on a discussion on vaccines. This is a remarkable person with huge capability. Our challenge as a global system is to reinforce people like him and the structures of public health, even in a very difficult country like Central African Republic, with all of its instability, and try and help a system to be maintained of public health that does provide protection to the population, not to be substituting. So that would be my major message, to avoid substitution and to find a way to support the public health authorities. Our national societies work as auxiliaries to government. You know, yes, we are supposed to be neutral and impartial and we have our principles, but we're also there to partner them and to partner the ministries of health and the ministries of education and all the doctors and nurses and teachers who are on the front line, you know, often doing heroic work with very, very low salaries. So I think this whole way in which the aid architecture gets behind the normative and long-term sustainability of government is a crucial issue. And all of this project-driven, northern-driven development aid, you know, a lot of it doesn't work because it doesn't take that logic from the start.
Thank you, Richard. NOELLA, the floor is yours.
Coming myself from Congo and have such a long history of colonization, of economical war, and still so many conflicts in the east of the Congo. It's it's not, we still have so much more work to do, and peace is a very important element of the growth and of Africa. NGOs definitely has a critical role to play, and individuals, I do believe a lot on the individual and the power of us. The NGO, like I said, has a critical role to play in driving the development, and one can be matched to another actor or sector. Firstly, NGOs have a critical role not only to play in influencing governments through advocacy and campaigning work. They are able to raise awareness around catastrophic situations, but their roles also goes one step further. Many NGOs work on the ground and therefore have first-hand experience of the situation. This deep understanding of the contextual background, situation, and dynamics in a given community are critical in leading a government to implement solutions and policy that actually work and are sustainable. The sustainability is very key. The most important role of NGOs for me is securing the buy-in on local communities, which is crucial to implementing change from the ground up, like most of us work on the ground up. Again, in the education space, education initiative that are introduced as grassroots efforts are likely to be much more successful over the long term. It's important to not look only the short term, but long term. And that's sometimes what is missing, as they have the backing of local community support and advocacy. Once introduced, they must then, of course, be reinforced by national and advocacy, national legislation, or with international funding or national funding. But in the implementation and planning stages, working directly with the community is critical to ensuring that initiatives are impactful and again sustainable. We're living in an incredible, complex and challenging times. 2020 shows us more than ever. It's more important that that African development does not fall down on the global agenda, but we need to put all the sector, industry, NGO to play unparalleled role here. And like we were saying before, the unity of Africa, the solidarity has to be there. And that's for me as an African, to write our own narrative, to be together, and to really have a clear vision and agenda will be very important to determine the next few years of the development of an entire, not only country, but on the entire continent coming together.
Thank you. I know Elena also would probably like to add.
Thank you, Richard and Noella. And I think let me comment on the NGO role. Of course, Tostan has a history of 30 years at the grassroots, and we see our role in accompanying, of course, communities in their journey, but also governments. And I was mentioning to the strengthening democracy and civic engagement piece earlier on. I think we have the power to suggest the models that can work, and so by suggesting or by demonstrating that the success of those models, we accompany governments in doing their job. I think NGOs shouldn't have their own agenda. They are there to support the government agenda and to support the citizen agenda. And so this is what we are seeing. Having non-judgmental and very respectful and inclusive approaches is the way to allow people to have their own leadership and to lead, again, the way and to identify the challenges and the solution to those challenges that they esteem being the most appropriate. I think what we have seen is also accompany the government in that accountability journey. And I think data, we haven't talked about the importance of data until now. I think data is an example that I want to bring to the table. Most of these governments have been accompanied by bigger institutions like the World Bank and major funders to strengthen their system and to build health information system, digital information system that allow them, to better manage, to have better visibility on the challenges that they face. We feel that if the citizen and the grassroots is not empowered to also use that data to make better and informed choices, we miss an opportunity really to to have that sustainability, that ownership that needs to come from the grassroots and needs to come within the system. So we have seen mayor, for example, one of a mayor that we work very close with that has won several prizes for transparency, for accountability. So he's called the Khalidousi of Medina Rafula, southern Senegal, has really brought his council together and look at the success rate of girls in the schools. And he realized that they're not doing a good job. And so he started questioning the data and seeing together with, the counselor, which are not educated, but they can appreciate the challenges, that it was a matter of having overwhelmingly classes with too many pupils that couldn't really access a good education. And so by the use of data, they managed to build more schools, and they advocated, as Noella was saying, they have that power of advocate and have more resources to go to that particular issue, and so building schools. We are also strongly believer that it's important to do a local to global connection. And so NGOs also have their role to really support governments to have visibility, again, to have that local to national connection, and then really to project what they are doing. And it's so important to see that as a citizen at the grassroots is influencing, and let me go back to the Sustainable Development Goals, because this is our common reference, is having an influence in really pushing forward that agenda. And lastly, I would say we have a role to influence those who take decision regarding the funding. I think it's so important to understand that there is more needs. There is need really to fuel more resources at the grassroots, at the community level, and to embrace a mentality, a system change mentality that is really taking into account the complexity of this situation. So again, not coming with the judgmental, so having, this is your challenge, this is your solution, here is the money to achieve that, but really coming with a co-creation spirit, with a collaborative mindset that is really going to allow challenges that the continent is facing today, really to be addressed in a sustainable way and in a way that is relevant for Africans and can be shown actually as a solution to other continents.
That's what you say is important, relevant to Africans. That's key.
Wonderful. I think we're running out of time. We only have 13 minutes left. And at this point, I would like to ask each one of our wonderful panelists to share with us your closing thoughts. Maybe you can start with Andrew.
Delighted. Look, I think we've heard something that's very powerful today, which is the importance of local ownership of development, and I can only reinforce what's been said by the panelists who have far more expertise than I do, working on the ground across the continent, which is that where you empower local communities, and in our case, where you empower local businesses, you get transformationally different development results. The other thing I'd like to say, just coming back to my initial comments, is the economic effects of this crisis are going to be with us for a long time. And our great fear is that we're going to see the real impacts of the crisis from a real economy perspective, from a business perspective, in the coming months. We haven't yet seen the full impact on business and employment. And if there are further spreads of the pandemic and local lockdowns, then that will only accelerate the rate of business failures or the rate of redundancies. We have a huge problem. Point I really want to get across, and you see media reports occasionally saying, well, maybe this is the time to step back from providing 0.7% GDP in international aid. Maybe this is not the right time to providing debt relief to governments who have spent too much during the good years, so to speak. That's wrong. In an interdependent global economy, the world will simply not recover to what it was in 2019 from an economic development perspective until all countries are recovered. And that means ending the acute phase of the pandemic. So making sure that there's equitable access to vaccines, tests, treatments. And secondly, making sure that governments have fiscal space to provide support to businesses, to provide support to displaced workers to help families weather the crisis. And if that is not forthcoming, then this time next year, a discussion around aid and development will be starting at a fundamentally lower baseline. So we really need the international community to step up. And for those who think that's a moral argument, this is coming from the business community. There is a business logic in a globalized world for a comprehensive package of debt relief and debt restructuring, for a new issuance of IMF special drawing rights. And we really need governments to understand that this is not philanthropy, this is not the development community, this is the real economy speaking. Thank you.
Wonderful. Richard, the floor is yours. Please share with us your closing thoughts.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for letting me be part of this panel. I mean, so I think on the positives, just to start by this, just to finish the accountability question of, you know, when citizens pay taxes and they have governments delivering things for them like education and healthcare, when citizens make donations to civil society actors in their countries, that brings an accountability relationship and a social contract. And so more momentum in that terrain, I think, in the long term is absolutely critical, and talks to the ownership and building a stronger society and more effective governments. On the economic impacts, I mean, I share the same concerns that that many of the panelists have mentioned. We're going into a very severe crisis, and the global solidarity has never been weaker. You know, I sit here in New York, and this is a pretty despondent UN General Assembly. Lots of words about multilateralism, lots of words about solidarity, but not a lot of evidence of it. You know, the rich world have already bought half of the global vaccines ahead of time for themselves for COVID. And so, yes, we've got the COVAX facility that will provide lots of opportunity to get vaccine to developing countries, middle-income countries. But you can see that the solidarity isn't strong enough at the moment, and the global leadership isn't strong enough. And leaving Africa to deal with the consequence of a climate crisis that was not created in Africa, leaving them to deal with the consequence of COVID-19 with inadequate resources would be very short-sighted. So, you know, how to build, I mean, I think that the comments made earlier that NGOs are good at linking the global to the local. That's one thing, you know, providing more pressure to places that can put more resources on. If we don't do that, we will end up with a massive humanitarian landscape. The hunger problems are already rising in Yemen, in parts of East Africa. It's not acceptable. And so, you know, we have enough resources. $3 trillion have been spent in the US on the recovery and the survivability of the US to the COVID crisis. It's a question of making choices and a much deeper practical solidarity showing itself very quickly, and not leaving African countries with very high levels of debt where they can't then make choices about investing in education and investing in health and other priorities for their population.
Great, thank you, Richard. Noella, go ahead.
For me, the future is girls. If we invest in girls in Africa and equip them with the belief that they can get an education and a career, and if we make sure that we have the system in place to make that a reality, we're going to create some incredible opportunities on the continent, and we're going to elevate another generation and another narrative for Africa. So let's invest in girls, let's invest in women.
Absolutely. Elena?
Yes, I couldn't agree more with Noella. You know, it's clear that, you know, there is a piece of the population that really wants the seat at the table, deserves the seat at the table, and has a voice and that needs to be heard. And thanks again to the work of so many you know, organizations, multilateral governments, NGOs, you know, multilateral institutions, businesses. These women have now the opportunity really to step up and to be heard. And there are so many, maybe not enough, as Noella was saying. So let's keep investing where for this to be possible. My closing remarks, and thank you so much to my colleagues for bringing these different perspectives, are really going back to really the fact that together if we want really to have to face the kind of situation that Richard was talking about, that most likely coming soon to the African continent as a consequence of this global pandemic. We feel like the vaccine will come very, very, very late here in Africa, but the consequences are going to be seen very soon, and the financial ones. And of course, rural communities are going to be affected very differently. I think there is, I wouldn't, I'm not sure if the solidarity piece or the solidarity word, I would call it more the co-creation piece. I think there is need for people, for organizations to come together differently, and of course to come together to support the agenda of the governments. And we haven't talked about the African institutions because we haven't had the time, but I think they have a role, a major role to play in creating enabling environment or a nurturing space for this government to have, as Noella was saying, a clarity of the purpose, a unified vision towards, a better future for this continent. So I would say, let's be bold. Let's try to embrace a complexity mindset. Let's try to co-create in a different way. Let's not bring our own agenda to the table. Let's try to see things differently, to bring a different mentality, because again, we see that sometimes solutions are just the tip of the iceberg. Most of the policies that are developed do not address root causes. So we said invest in women, but how can women really have that space? We need to change social norms. We need to allow men to be empowering women to have those leadership roles. So I think it's time for the world as a global space to really address root causes of the situation that we're facing, and to have the courage, really, to be brave, to be bold, so that resources can go really where it matters, and where it can really bring about a change, a sustainable change, and a change that is owned by the people that are going to benefit from that change. So thank you for giving me this opportunity. It was a pleasure to talk with all of you, and thank you to the audience. You were silent today, unfortunately. It would have been great to listen to you and to your feedback, but we really appreciated your time to be with us today. And thank you, Ghana. Over to you.
Thank you, everybody, our wonderful panelists. I want to thank each of you for sharing your insights, your thoughts, and the work that you're doing, and also for enabling me, the audience, and everyone who's watching to see the world through your point of view. And to everyone who joined us today, thank you.